Who joined us by phone that we can't see? I've got 3:01. We'll give it a minute or so, and then we'll get started to be respectful of those of you who have gotten here by 3.
Okay, I'm back.
Excellent.
Hi, Doug.
Hello, Rick.
How are you, my friend?
Good. You look like you're looking at the, it's very fuzzy, like I'm looking through a piece of wax paper to see.
Oh, my bad. You were. I covered my screen.
Alrighty, well, I've got 3:02. Well, I'm sure we'll have some other folks pop in. Today, Learning Lab, welcome to our nonprofit's really different. Our guest facilitator is Doug Brown, who's done a lot of work with non-for-profits. And we hear from other affiliates from time to time that, oh, nonprofits are different. You know, you can't work with them the same way that you work with what I'm going to call a traditional for-profit company. And we've had several affiliates, Doug Brown being one of them, that has had a different experience. And yeah, they may talk a different language, they may use different vocabulary, and they may be structured differently from a financial perspective, but at the end of the day, they're still a business. And businesses need what you guys and gals bring to the table to continue to grow and get better. So that's what this afternoon's hour is about. So with that, we have Franco and we have Rick and we have somebody on the phone who we don't know who it is yet. And hopefully we'll have some additional
mystery guest.
It's our mystery guest with a 303 phone number. So with that, Doug, I'll let you start. And okay. I'm going to mute myself just to keep it clean.
Fantastic. I thought what I would do is kind of take you through some of the things that you may or may not know about both nonprofits and not-for-profits, and then kind of some of the languaging that I've picked up, and then kind of with the balance of the time remaining, kind of talk about some of the kinds of things that Tammy is referring to, how I've structured some things the same, how I've structured some things differently, and then answer any questions or discuss any items until we either hit 4 o'clock or run out of content, whichever comes first. And so here we go. Hopefully you can see my screen. There is a difference between not-for-profit and nonprofits. So not-for-profit companies typically are run by volunteers. They can be charities or hospitals, religious groups, clubs, trade unions, welfare societies, or similar organizations. A lot of times they'll provide local communities with helpful service, and typically they're thought to be smaller than nonprofits. Nonprofits typically have a purpose besides making a profit, such as promoting cultural or educational or religious beliefs and objectives. They can qualify for tax-free fundraising because their income supports and sustains their services provided. And some of the stuff that I'm giving you is purely right off of the different definitions and so on that I found as I was prepping for this. Nonprofits can have salaried employees, but their salary does not come from the organization's fundraising work. And they can also hire volunteers, but these individuals typically are not the direct beneficiary of the organization's income. What kinds of things are similar between nonprofits and not-for-profits? Typically both serve the needs of the community. They can generate income, but they reinvest all of their earnings to continue operations and support their causes. Staffing tends to be come out from volunteers. They can hire and pay higher level employees. They're because they can be incorporated at the state level, it provides both a legal as well as a financial security. And of course, neither one pays dividends because there's no stockholders, so to speak. Some of the differences: nonprofits usually carry out larger, more organized activities that focus on environmental, social, political, or economic missions. Not-for-profits often carry out smaller group activities that focus on sports, hobbies, or special interests. I'll try to, give me 1 second. I will try to kill that. Just got to move something out of the way. Hopefully that'll be the last time that happens. Nonprofits commonly function as official bodies with a charter and governing board of representatives. Since nonprofits are organized like a business, they expect to earn a profit, but they're turning that back into the organization to be able to, again, kind of advance the cause that they believe in. Not-for-profits commonly bring together a group of people with similar interests without necessarily forming a legal entity or governing board. A lot of times people will talk about not-for-profits and so on. Whoop. One of the things that I had thought about and then quite candidly forgotten about was there are literally 29 different types of 501c type nonprofits in the U.S. Kind of walking you through them a little bit. 501c1 are typically federal credit unions. And the reason why I'm doing this, I'm not just doing this just to kind of give you an encyclopedic view of the subject matter. I'm thinking about it because a lot of times we don't, some of these things that I'm going to share with you, we don't always think about as potential clients, and yet we really should. So 501c1s are federal credit unions. C2s are pretty specific. These are organizations that hold title to land or to property. And basically any income that they collect, they are basically turning over that entire amount to an exempt organization. So for example, if a college or university owns property, or if a holding company owns property and they're using the income from that property to kind of fund the main mission of an exempt organization, that's what I'm talking about. 501c3s are probably the thing that most people tend to think about when they think of not-for-profits and nonprofits. And these are organized and have to be operated exclusively for exempt purposes, such as religious or educational, charitable, scientific, and literary. And again, none of these earnings may inure or become beneficial, if you will, to any private shareholder or any individual. It's interesting if you have a 501c3 and if people are really running it the way it's supposed to run, that organization should literally keep two sets of books on purpose. a set of books that basically speak to the purpose of the organization, and a set of books that are purely on the social fund, if you will, for any of the members. So if the organization was running an event to raise funds to be able to generate income to advance its mission, that's considered part of its exempt purpose. If they're collecting money and then they decide to throw a party for the volunteers, that's really not part of the exempt purpose, and that should be coming out of more of their social fund, if you will, than their fundraising. Don't know how often people stick to that, but I can tell you in terms of the barbershop world that I'm a member of, that's something that we really pay attention to, because otherwise you're using legitimate funds, so to speak, for an illegitimate purpose. 501c4s, social welfare organizations, these are some of the things that they do. They can actually operate an airport, or they can be a community association that works to increase or improve public services, housing, residential parking. It can be a group that publishes a free community newspaper, or sponsors a community sports league, baseball league, soccer league, so on. Can be the kind of organization that sponsors holiday programs in and around in between Thanksgiving and New Year's, or the local parade and all those kinds of things could all be organized as a 501c4. And somebody who's think of this as almost like an economic development corporation's purpose. If somebody is going out specifically to develop land and so on, so that it'll bring in jobs to help relieve unemployment, that would be considered a 50, that they would form under a 501c4. 501c5s, think labor unions, whether they be labor specifically, farm workers, as you can see, they're horticultural. 501c6s, think chambers of commerce and business organizations, real estate boards, and yes, even the NFL would be considered part of the 501c6. And again, they're not technically, and I had a smile when I saw this, they're technically not organized for profit. And I said to myself, yeah, right. If anybody's ever had anything to do with the Super Bowl and all the costs that are associated with that, somebody's making money. Let me put it to you that way. What are those? So those are some of the kinds of organizations that would all be part of when we just kind of throw around the terms not-for-profit or nonprofit. What kinds of phrases are helpful to know? And I'm just going to, and I can certainly make this available to anybody that's on the call. But these are some of the kinds of things that have kind of popped up as I've been working with different organizations. NGOs are typically non-government organizations. They're not always for private companies, but they tend to be in that the nonprofit world. They have a tendency to talk about people or members or community served. And that community always gets defined kind of by the main purpose that they're working towards. So whether it's an arts community or whether it's a homeless community, it's not always a geographic distinction. And sometimes that can be, when you first start working in that arena, sometimes it can be a little bit confusing because they'll use, this is something we need to do for our community. And at least when I first started down this path, I tended to be thinking in terms of geographic, when they could literally be talking internationally based on who they consider members or participants in what it is that they do. The CDP, also known as the Cultural Data Project, was originally started and funded by Geraldine Dodge, as in Geraldine R. Dodge, as in Geraldine Rockefeller Dodge, because they wanted to be able to say, hey, if all these people are spending all this money, how do we know that they're actually doing any good? And so that's where the CDP project started, in terms of they collect data on everything. Well, over the course of time, they started working with Pew Charitable Trusts to kind of get more and more involved in terms of data collection and so on. They changed their name about a year or two ago, CDP did, to Data Arts. And then literally recently, within the last 6 months, if not even less than that, now they're known as SMU Data Arts. Man, you can get data on them on everything from how many people are typically coming to events, to almost line item budgets based on total budgets of organization. They got it knocked. Typically, there's two organizations. One, if you hear the phrase charity watchdog or charity navigator, these are folks that literally watch how much money is being allocated in kind of non-mission related activities, whether it's fundraising, whether it's a kind of administrative and general G&A kind of stuff. It's something that both boards pay attention to, as well as executive teams are very conscious of the fact that they don't want to operate too much out of the norms or what's considered good governance. The Foundation Center is an organization that collects all kinds of best practices on all kinds of different ways things operate. So if you hear people talk about the Foundation Center, that's what they're referring to. It's more than just raising funds. And when the next phrase down is board development, that can be two different, depending on who you're talking to, that can go two different directions. Board development can be kind of, okay, who else do we need that we want to get on the board? But it can also be, what are we expecting the board to generate in terms of fundraising activity? Kind of one of the rules of thumb in terms of when people become a member of a nonprofit organization is the board is either going to give or get X number of dollars per person is kind of their contribution. So when somebody says, yeah, I'd like to be a board member, that personal kind of commitment can be anywhere from a couple of $1,000 to 5-figure dollars in terms of what you're expected to raise on behalf of the organization every year. And every board will kind of choose and has a slightly different process. But it's typically more than just kind of showing up and going yay or nay for a board meeting. Some of the things that they tend to talk about they call it resources. Many, many times when they're referring to resources, they're referring to dollars. Sometimes it's talent, but it tends to be kind of in and around the dollars is how they tend to use that. Mission and vision took me a while to get used to with them. The mission tends to be closer to what we would call a vision, and their vision tends to be more of a kind of an end state and kind of what they're doing to advance toward the mission. So it's almost like in our world, you almost have to flip the use of the phraseology. One of the things that people have been doing more and more of is writing what are called impact statements that basically said, hey, as a result of the work that we're going to be doing for the next couple of years, this is the way we expect it to impact our community or our members served or the homeless population or underserved population. Fundraising has all kinds of little nuances. There's a whole organization called the Association for Fundraising Professionals, and that is a whole language in and of itself. in terms of kind of what they'll talk about in terms of events and planned giving and so on. That in annual campaigns, that has that's one of those things that you really kind of want to understand. What does that mean within the organization that you're working in? The CAE is a Certified Association Executive, and these tend to be traded professional associations that then get certified, not unlike some of the certifications that we go through for our AC, or TAN, I should say. Old habits die hard. Sorry about that. And this is literally similar to like a CPA exam or something like this. This is a formal exam that they have to sit for and get that CAE designation, and then have to keep it up in terms of annual or biannual, X number of hours to be able to stay fresh in their field. The largest organization of its type is ASAE, which is the American Society for Association Execs. When we talk about development, we tend to be talking about management or leadership or sales. When they talk about development, they're talking about fundraising and how do they generate the income that they need to be able to operate. And they'll talk about both restricted assets in terms of things where people have given particular amounts of money for particular causes. Hey, I want you to build this building. I want you to buy this piece of property. I want this to only go, to a pet project that they have. When we talk about income, we tend to think of it in terms of kind of profit and loss. When they tend to talk about income, they tend to think we would consider that revenue. In terms of that tends to be top line for them. And the Office of Advancement is really kind of their main fundraising office. One of the things that they do get involved in terms of the formal board structure is governance. And I can certainly talk an awful lot about that. I'm going to hold that one until we get into the Q&A piece. But that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different different ways of operating it. And most people really struggle to be effective in terms of a governance role because they are so much more used to being in a management role. And governance, when it's done well, particularly at a board level, is really at the policy-making level and not getting into the operations. And it is so easy for people to get sucked into the kind of the day-to-day operations, particularly if you're thinking about something like a township government where you have commissioners that are directly related, directly elected by people, and then all of a sudden they want to start to talk to different department heads, the person who's handling public works or parks and rec or whatever. I mean, they can be well-intentioned, but they can really screw up the ability of the organization to do what it needs to do. Most organizations that are well-run in the nonprofit line have a pretty strong code of ethics in terms of what the board can and cannot do, who can be hired, how contracts have to be executed. So it doesn't look like, as soon as I get on, all I'm doing is getting on the board so I can put my hand in the till and take money out and kind of feather my own nest. Kind of the work of a lot of the organizations typically fall into what they'll refer as programs and services. And this tends to be for the population or the membership that's being served. When they talk about programming, they're not talking about any kind of IT programming. When they're talking about programming, it's really how are they structuring the programs and services and timing and so on that they're using to deliver their services. A lot of the ways in medical related associations, a lot of the learning in a lot of the conferences and a lot of the white paper delivery will all be known as symposia or symposiums in terms of the way they share information. One of the things that just came up when I was working with an organization last week is they'll consider lobbying as a subset of advocacy. And so while lobbying may in fact have somebody paid to show up at your state legislature or your state or the federal government, advocacy, they tend to think in terms of kind of grassroots letter campaigns, a whole bunch of people showing up, whether it's at a legislator's community office or something like that, just to kind of drive that message. Hey, hello, we're out here and we're going to need your help. When they talk in terms of community engagement, that can also be as part of an advocacy type of a piece, but it can also be something that they're striving for their members or for their people being served. For example, the group that I was with last week happens to be a group of people that suffer from a particular medical condition. And so they want the community to be engaged so that they're learning what's kind of happening with their bodies and kind of be smarter consumers, if you will, of what this particular organization is trying to put out. The NIH for most of us stands for Not Invented Here, but in the nonprofit world, it means National Institutes of Health. And so when you start to hear people talk about NIH, particularly if they're on the medical side, that's what they're referring to. And a lot of times they'll deliver kind of their services, particularly if they're on a national level. They'll have clinics or something like that. They can't be every place around the country. So they'll build centers of excellence. Think of the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic would be a prime example where folks that are focused on particular diseases or particular conditions would want to become part of that clinic, and then kind of within that have their own center of excellence. We've kind of talked about this one in a sideways way. Underserved populations. It doesn't always have to have. It doesn't have to be purely inner city. It doesn't have to be people below a certain demographic. From an income level, it can be just who is not taking advantage of the services that we use. In some cases, it is folks that are traditionally kind of have a hard time of getting services. A lot of times, this will even speak to things like prison populations, in addition to some of the typical socio-economic things that you tend to think of. Self-directed is something that a lot of associations are now using to say, hey, we want our members to be able to kind of go in to our website, and we want to be able to provide all kinds of information so that they can start to manage their own situation or manage their member experience. That's something that I've seen more and more of start to take place over the last couple of years. Caregiver is the generic for anybody who is taking care of somebody with a medical condition. It may be a family member, such as a spouse or a mom and dad or a brother or sister or an uncle, or it could be somebody who's paid to be in that spot. But you always want to make sure that you understand what context they're using caregivers. When they talk about affiliates, no, it's not part of the TA network. They're kind of talking about what kind of chapters and local organizations do they have a tendency to have around the country or around the world. When they talk in terms of capacity building, this tends to be both kind of an income perspective, but it also talks in terms of, particularly if it's some kind of a grassroots organization, when they talk about capacity building, they're really talking about building a cadre of volunteer leaders and kind of strengthening who else can kind of start to carry that message beyond just the core group. It's something that has been used an awful lot within inner cities to really try to create more of a social fabric and kind of help people kind of get out of their own way. One of the other phrases that you can hear is a SIG, and when you first hear it, it's typically not spelled out. And so my first reaction was, well, what are they talking about cigarettes for? But they really are, it's all about special interest groups. And these tend to be subsections within an organization that has something in common. There might be a women's SIG, or there might be a SIG for rising leaders, for people under 35 years old, and so on. But it tends to almost be like a section or a segment kind of within the general organization. And then last but not least, one of the books that I came across, haven't purchased it, but I thought if somebody really gets stuck, this was printed, this is probably a dozen years old now, but the Dictionary of Nonprofit Terms and Concepts. And so I stuck the authors in there in case somebody wants to grab it and refer to it for whatever reason. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's how I spent my summer vacation in terms of prepping for you guys, kind of talking about what I've seen in terms of how this is a lot like what we're used to. When we start to talk about vision and mission and where the organization is going, all of those kinds of questions that we typically ask during the strategic planning process, a lot of them still are true to form. Whether it's where you're really trying to go long term, do you see the organization being local versus regional versus super regional versus national versus international? Think of the American Cancer Society, something that would kind of, or the Heart Association that would have something along those lines. Do they expect to remain an organization of 5 people or 50 people or 500 people or 5,000 people? And how much of that do they expect to be able to do through paid staff? And how much do they expect to be able to do through volunteers? And do they have a strategy for those kinds of things? What kind of income are they going to shoot to bring in over the next couple of years? And how are they going to go through organizing that income? Are they going to are they looking for a lot of end of life gifts? Are they looking to do the equivalent, a lot of car washes and bake sales? Are they looking for people to go out and do a lot of corporate canvassing, and making some pretty strong donations? Are they looking at partnering with other organizations? All of those kinds of things in terms of how are they going to get the resources that they need to be able to do to fulfill their mission is all fair game. All of the values discussions that we have as part of the strategic plan are also identical to the kind of values discussions that you'll find yourself having with them. And a lot of times I will ask, unless they're a very, very specific organization, I will ask who it is that they're competing against. And if somebody goes, well, we don't really have a competitor, I encourage them to say, well, that may be true, but my request is go out and talk to 5 people each between this week and next week or whatever the case may be, and ask them who they think you're competing for, whether it's for volunteer time or resources. And I don't think they're going to come back. I don't think you're going to come back next week with the answer nobody. and nothing. They don't always think about who they're competing for in terms of time and energy and so on, and volunteer time and bandwidth. But that can be a very vibrant discussion, exactly the same way it is here. One of the things that I did a talk on in the barbershop world, down in what's called Harmony University down in Texas. I made the mistake of looking at Rick when I said that, down in Nashville, Tennessee, was The Road to Relevance. Now, this one was written specifically for associations, but it has an awful lot of no kidding, relevance to almost anybody that's doing a not-for-profit organization. It asks a lot of tough questions. It really kind of asks, what kinds of things do you need to stop doing? A lot of the same kinds of questions that we would want to ask, or we should be asking as part of our strategic planning process. When I always end up taking them down through, okay, so what do you really want to accomplish, in the next 24 months to 36 months? Sometimes I'll go as little as 18, but they have a tendency to operate kind of slowly in general. They almost always see themselves kind of being restricted in terms of their fundraising capability and so on. And I think one of the things that we can help them do is not be stuck in terms of their approach to what kinds of things are happening. I think we can, particularly by either using the kind of the obstacle identification process, or just by helping them kind of brainstorm more ways that they don't have to be stuck with limited income streams and so on, in more cases than they normally would be thinking about. So those are some of the and then all the rules of, okay, so now that you want to do this, how are you going to get your message out in terms of marketing messages, and how are you going to communicate with people and so on? All of those kinds of things are all fair game. So let me minimize that, and we can kind of go from there. Ladies and gentlemen, kind of questions, thoughts. What kinds of things do you have on your mind? Your shared window to the front of others. How do I do that?
Tammy, you got to take control away from that man.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you make him a co-host.
Resume share.
I heard somebody ding. Did somebody have a question?
I just got observation stuff, and I'm going to speak to this in October at our Power Summit. I got it right. Yes. Really, I've been working with associations, not so much nonprofit, but I'm finding that associations are a pretty healthy market for us in development, et cetera. And I'll be mapping that out a little bit about the Emerging Leaders Program. But part of what I found is when associations are designed to help their members, so are chambers of commerce, so are et cetera. But if we really focus on giving them something that will help their members, and I know you found this, Doug, positioning it as the association is providing a value add for their members, and you're just the guy that's there to help them out. I'm here to help. I just facilitate. This is all the Chamber of Commerce stuff. You still get the revenue for doing the work. And that there's a great way to position that as well, as opposed to trying to serve them directly, actually serve their members. And the ASAE, I've been digging in there every single day. I'm talking to association executives every day trying to find new inroads into their association to give to their members. Because they've got, 100 to 800 members that are all potential clients of ours.
Well, some of the organizations that I work with in New York City have literally 270,000 around the U.S.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah. I was working with the CCIM Institute. For any of you guys folks that are familiar with that in the real estate market, that's the big commercial designation that they have. And I would get up and give a presentation that gave me access to all of their people, strategic planning. I started working with the association, and frankly, I did it way less than I normally would. One, out of a relationship that I had with the incoming president, but also because it gave me access to 40 people who ran commercial real estate that were on the strategic planning committee, which was, you can imagine facilitating that for a strat plan.
Yep. Yeah, that's not the time to take stupid pills. I agree with you.
Oh my gosh. But the reality is I now do chapter. They take me around the nation and I do chapter strat planning from doing the national. I just signed another one for December, and it's a day long. It's because they all have them at this point. They all have their plans. It's just to go back and re-facilitate, re-help them redo the next stage. So it's not a full-blown strat plan. It's a one-day facilitation. Whatever, it's the second or third year I've done that. It's recurring business.
One of the distinctions that I make is the difference between doing the strat plan, which is kind of almost starting with a blank sheet of paper, and really kind of updating their operating plan. That tends to be in that 18-month to three.
That's more what I'm doing now, because most of these associations have had a plan or have a plan of some sort, but they need to clarify. They need some new ideas, new blood, new facilitation styles that they don't normally get. Because they normally, what I found with associations, especially the bigger ones, they're real, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a shiny object, is academics. They're really, really impressed with academics and lots of letters after your name. And I'm telling you, academics are horrible at facilitating, getting people to do things, as we all well know. So,
super.
And Doug, you and I can get up and do our song and dance, entertain the world, and they think that we just hung the moon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because they've never looked at it from that perspective.
Franco, do you want to take yourself off mute? I'd love to get some input or some insight from you one way or the other. And then Lee, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. Franco, you're now off of mute.
Sorry, I'm babysitting.
Uh-oh, I'm having trouble hearing you.
He actually is babysitting his granddaughter while he's watching this.
All right, I will put you back on. We'll put you back on mute, and hey Lee, what's cooking with you? What have you been thinking about? Are you babysitting too? Leona,
right?
Yeah. Oh,
Leona, I don't see you on. I don't see you're muted. So.
Who, me?
Yeah, you just being shy.
That was just my bad.
Oh no, Doug was asking if you had any comments based upon what he shared. So we wanted you unmuted.
I don't think I shared anything.
Okay.
You haven't yet. We're giving you as an opportunity to.
Well, I'm going to have to be completely honest. I have just been having you off on the side, and I have been working. So I'm not really a good participator.
Aha. Okay.
I got busted.
You definitely did. I'm surprised that you guys should know me better than that by now, that I'm an equal opportunity harasser. There's no place safe when you're in my room, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm going to go sit in the back of the classroom now.
Got it. Got it.
You have Mr. Myers and Mr. Clanton.
Oh,
Mike Myers is on and Glenn Clanton is on as well.
gentlemen, I'll take either one. Comments from either one of you.
Hey, this is Mike, so I unmuted myself, I hope. Can you hear
You
me?
did.
I can. And now I can actually see you.
So I'm working with the Boys and Girls Club in two dimensions. One is a volunteer and a volunteer organizer. And then the other one is I'm proposing gently right now, helping with their strategic planning, which is about 10 years old with about a 5-year update and 2 directors in between the update and the current director or the current CEO. And so what I perceive is that they have two sales channels, if you will. One is the programs themselves for the kids, and they have to attract kids because without kids, they got nothing, right? And the other one is the funding because the kids pay something ridiculously high, like $35 a year to go there every day after school. And so they need, they're probably running about $500,000 a year now. They've been up to close to $1 million when economy was better. And they recognize fully that the competition is the other people with their hands out asking for money. And so my approach with the volunteering is to do workshops. And the one I'm working on right now is an interview workshop where I bring in donors who have donated in the past but not the current year and ask them to come in and be volunteers and help with the workshop, with the idea that they will reconnect with the Boys and Girls Club and then give more money, right? So that may be kind of a weak premise, but that's the premise. So I guess I kind of wanted your comment on that, but using that kind of concept, how would you advise I sell the strategic planning process as a unique value to the Boys and Girls Club as a nonprofit? And I think they're a 501c3, I think. Could be a 4. So anyway, that's the question. How would you advise I sell that process?
Are you planning on getting paid to do that?
It will be a reduced rate, but I have found, Doug, that if I don't get paid, I don't get buy-in.
Well, the reason why I'm asking the question is, do you have anything that you had to sign? You said you're a board member?
No, I'm not a board member. I'm just a volunteer and a volunteer organizer.
Okay. Because I was going to say, as a board member, sometimes you're kind of restricted in terms of what services you can sell. So
it looks like your hand is in the till if you're not careful.
Correct. Exactly. That's why I wanted to make sure that I understood kind of which role were you in. I've got 2 thoughts for you. Thought number 1 is, how connected are you to the board?
I know a couple of people on the board, but I wouldn't say I'm connected. I've not been invited to their meetings. I've not discussed the Boys and Girls Club in great detail with any other board members.
So I think that would be my first recommended foray. To the group that I did last week, their CEO, who happened to also been the chairman of the organization where I had met him, this association group in New York, he and I literally went out as a courtesy to have a drink in New York City while we were both taking trains going 2 different directions. And what started to be a half an hour courtesy drink on his part turned out to be 2.5 hours later, I walked out with a contract. And both of us ended up taking later trains to where we were going. But what I basically did was I walked him through our approach, meaning the Paradigm Associates approach to strategic planning. And it gave him so much food for thought in terms of how we did things with kind of no ramps to nowhere. He said, you know what, it's been a long time since we really took a look at what it is that we needed to do. And I really like the thoroughness of your approach. And I think that one, quote unquote, I volunteered for. but to Rick's point, since that one that I volunteered for, because again, I had between 40 and 50 association executives captive in a room for a day and a half. That's led to multiple assignments and multiple ways of making money as a result of doing that. But the first thing that I had to do was establish value. And so by kind of understanding what they were trying to do and kind of where the board members saw themselves as stuck. And to that degree, it was exactly like the sales process we used for everything else. I mean, after I kind of did my quals and kind of the overarching approach that we used to strategic planning, the other parts were all about really kind of digging inside in terms of what's kind of been happening, how's the organization really doing, where are you missing the mark, where are you having successes, exactly the same way we would if we were doing fact finding with anybody else. And then he actually took it to the executive director and basically said, hey, I really think we need to do this. And in that particular case, the chairman and the board really do have the power. The executive director is a paid staffer. So if the board says to him, in this particular case to him, hey, I want to be able to make this thing happen, or this is what we're going to do, the executive director's job is to say, yes, sir, and yes, board members, and let's make that happen. As opposed to in some organizations that have a very, very weak board with a strong executive director or a strong chief administrative officer, they tend to operate like the king, and the board tends to operate kind of, okay, so what is it that you need to be able to do your job from us, kind of a thing. So I guess my first question back to you in terms of boys and girls clubs, is it a really strong executive director form of organization with board members kind of playing along, or is it really kind of a board driven organization with the president of boys and girls clubs kind of being the executor in chief of what the board wants to accomplish?
So I'm pretty sure this is true. I see the CEO as the strong voice. The board is kind of like just kind of going along as near as I can tell. Now, they did hire him, and so, I suppose they could fire him. They fired the previous CEO, but that's about the extent of action that I know on their part. This guy, his name is Matt, he admits that he doesn't know all he needs to know. He came up through the organization, and he says, I was good at working with the kids, and I was good at leading the staffers, but now my role is different. Right? So he knows that.
If I give you a choice between doing strategic planning for the organization or working with the executive director one-on-one in executive leadership, what would you do and why?
When you say executive leadership, you're just talking about the leadership program itself? Yeah. I probably would go into the strategic planning working with the director, because he knows he needs a strategic plan update. And also because of what you said, it gives me access to a whole lot more input, quality input into the process. And then I suppose there's a marketing thing there too, that I haven't emphasized that too much in my thinking because I'm really focused on helping the Boys and Girls Club. But in everything I do, and like bringing in volunteers, I connect with people who have the ability to make donations, which means they have companies usually that have some kind of a healthy top line.
Got it. Rick, you want to weigh in on that?
Oh man, in a heartbeat, I'd stay away from strategic planning. It's my weakest area personally. It truly is. I mean, I'd rather run a leadership program, convince them to put a leadership program in, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing. But strat planning is just, it's facilitation. So if as a skilled facilitator, and again, I think most associations at this stage already have a plan, whether it's a an established one that's been around. And you made a good point. You've got two types of executives, two types of boards that I've seen in not-for-profit and nonprofits. One is a very strong leader that's the president, usually the president of the association. And then you have, of course, you have your board members and you have your chairman of the board. The board is just a rubber stamp to do whatever that president, CEO wants to do. Or you have an incredibly strong board and the president, CEO is being kind of the tail is wagging the dog. The board's trying to get into operational stuff. So depending upon that, that's going to be how you want to approach number one. But for me, I'd rather do, strat plan has always been one of those areas for me that I can do, but I'm not very comfortable in it. And maybe I'm better at it than I think I am because I've done a lot of them. I just never find fun in it. And one of my core values is fun. So if I'm struggling, I'm like, screw this. I'm going to have some fun. Be true to who you are.
Got it. There was a couple other people on the line that I would also like to, and I also want to make sure there's somebody that I never asked kind of a question on because they were I think they were on the phone, weren't they, Tammy? Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. Yeah, there was, and they have since gone away. I think it's one of our future presenters, and he was using you as a facilitation case study. The only person that's left on the call that you haven't equally harassed is Glenn. I don't know if he has anything he would like to add.
Glenn, hop in. The water's fine.
All right, I'd love to jump in. And I haven't pursued nonprofits. I know that doesn't mean they don't have money. It just means they're nonprofit. I was listening in more so to get insight as to how I might pursue that as an opportunity. So I appreciate you sharing.
So what'd you learn?
Well, I learned that it seems like it's a viable market. You just have to find the right avenue and I guess with all things, the right person to have a conversation with.
Awful lot of truth in that. Yeah, I've done it at this point. I've done everything from medical organizations, hospitals, arts organizations, museums, different trade and professional associations. But a lot of the same kind of strategic lens that we use in our for-profit business is really identical. You just have to be aware that they're going to be using language differently. And that's why I kind of walked you through some of the different phraseology that I've kind of picked up over the years.
Thank you. I don't know if you mentioned it. I know I heard Rick say doing one-day sessions. What does that look like?
Well, Rick, you can go ahead and talk about what yours will, and I've got 3:59, so we'll have to talk quickly.
Yeah, same with me. I've got a 3:00. So what that means, it's just an update. You go through. You don't have to go through vision, values, mission as much, but you work from your critical success factors on down. What areas need to be worked on? What specific areas, and what's the time frame? And you really get down to nuts and bolts stuff quickly.
My process is very, very similar to that. I basically do a vision and mission challenge just to make sure that they still believe it. I basically ask them what things are off the table that they're not willing to deal with, or any kind of sacred cows. And once I get that off, then I'm kind of off and running into, okay, so what is it that you're really trying to accomplish, in that 18 to 36 months or that 12 to 36 month time period, depending on how comfortable they are with various planning windows.
Okay. Thank you.
Tammy, I turn it back to you. I've got 4:00 on the button.
And so do I. So first of all, Doug, thank you very much for your hour and time today. Hope everybody got some valuable nuggets. Our next learning lab is 2 weeks from today, 3:00 Eastern, and it's on how to define your market niche. And our guest facilitator will be Paul Anovic. And the Trusted Advisors team member will be Gerard. So thank you all for your participation, and we'll see you in 2.
One last thing, Doug. This
Yes.
is what I just got. Can you see this?
I can't read it, though, Rick.
Saints and sinners.
Hey, Rick, all I can say is, can you see this?
Yeah. There you go. Right there.
All right. See you guys in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.